I know I do not speak for all of my countrymen, but I think for some of us the idea that the result of this crisis will be the United States of France, it could be a lot worse. So I think some of us would settle for it right now. But, you know, there is a lot of gloom and a lot of pessimism from our speakers this morning, from what you read in the newspapers and see on television. But in fact, this may not be such a great defeat for Bushian capitalism, for American capitalism at the end of the 20th and beginning of the 21st century. After all, what has happened is that the profits have remained privatized, while it's the losses that have been socialized. So in some ways, you can look at this as a great triumph of capitalism. I suspect, though, taking a longer view, none of us will come to that conclusion. I was struck also by your prediction that we will in fact see more integration than disintegration as a result of this crisis. I think from an American standpoint, I would agree that what you're seeing in the United States now, in contrast to the deep gloom that is there, is a beginning of a national effort to pull together, to unite behind a new administration. In some ways, it's fortunate, I think, that we have elections coming up within a month now. And I wanted to lead, if I'm right, that there will be an opportunity here. I wanted to refer to what our friend, the Secretary General of NATO, said. He's absolutely right. If you look at what the two candidates are promising the American electorate, it is that the United States will continue to be involved in world leadership. There were no mainstream candidates during the primary season even who argued anything else. It is natural for the United States to look for a leadership role. The question is going to be, what leadership role? What kind of leadership role? Certainly it'll be quite different if John McCain wins or if Obama wins. It'll be quite different than what we've seen from President Bush. So my question to you is, for a new American administration, as we try to blend the political will to the economic realities, what should be the first steps taken on the economic front by the next administration?
I believe to sit down with what the Europeans are now, under the leadership of President Sarkozy, trying to put together in terms of ideas for a modest but significant step forward for governance. I must say that we Europeans often complain about not being consulted enough or taken seriously enough. It's really a pity that the Lisbon Treaty has not yet been ratified, because what a wonderful opportunity we would have had in the next few months. On one hand, a change in the administration in Washington, which at any rate will be, I guess, more multilaterally oriented than its predecessor. And on the other hand, a Europe that would have been able for the first time to have a permanent president of the Union and a more cohesive and united foreign policy. So for the time being, Europe will not be able to supply itself so efficiently to the increasing demand of Europe that I believe will come from the other side of the Atlantic, but I hope we can get there soon. And I will say, I'll stop there.
We want to move now into a general discussion among the six of you to try to compare and contrast the thoughts you have about governance and what needs to be done next. I'd like to start by noting the fact that Mr. Hoopschiffer and Prince Turki have both talked in their remarks about the question of Iran and nuclear weapons. And I'd like them to perhaps engage each other in an exchange of views on the importance and the urgency of this question. And I'll try to get it started by asking the Secretary General of NATO to comment on Prince Turki's idea that the way, if I've got this right, Prince Turki, correct me if not, the way we should start dealing with the Iranian nuclear ambitions is really to try to work toward a nuclear-free Middle East. Do you think that's a realistic goal? And perhaps then I can come back to Prince Turki and ask him how we would start that. How would you convince Israel to give up a nuclear arsenal that we all believe that it has? Mr. Secretary General?
I am afraid I have to start with a qualifier in this regard, because NATO is not and should not, I think, be involved in the talks and negotiations going on in the Security Council in the framework of the American EU-sponsored talks. I think NATO should stay out of it. One of the lessons I've learned, by the way, now in my job for almost 5 years, that NATO should not overeat. NATO should not try to take on more than it can swallow. Perhaps surprising from in NATO Secretary General, but nevertheless, in Iran is one of the issues where we should not, as NATO alliance, play a direct role. Nevertheless, and that's why I mentioned it, as one of the major challenges, it is of course a major challenge to prevent Iran from continuing with its drive to get the bomb. And my concern, of course, was the Security Council being as we speak, rather incapable of coming to further conclusions on further sanctions. If successful negotiations in the framework of Iran would automatically lead to a nuclear-free Middle East, I would have my doubts, but it would help. It would certainly help if that dossier, to use the French word, it could be brought to an end, which could be acceptable for all. But as long as that does not happen, and as we all know, Israel never admits what it has, I do not see very many arguments for the Jewish state to abandon its potential. So I'm not positive at this very moment, given the fact that I'm not positive about the world being able to stop Iran from fulfilling its ambitions, and as a consequence, there is not the slightest argument for any Israeli government, from whatever political, in whatever political form or cooperation or coalition, to do anything about its supposed nuclear arsenal.
If I could just insert there, what are the consequences for European security of Iran developing a nuclear weapon, and is NATO actively studying the consequences that will occur?
Well, you must distinguish two things here, I think. First of all, developing a possible nuclear weapon, and what is, I think, as dangerous, the missile technology, which is also developing at a fast pace. So it's a developing nuclear weapon, but if the missiles get more and more sophisticated to transport those weapons over ever longer distances, it becomes an element for the security not only of the United States, but of Europe as well. That is the reason, of course, behind the notion that also in the NATO framework, apart from the United States missile defense shield discussions and the interceptors in Poland, or the possible interceptors in Poland and the radar in the Czech Republic, that the NATO allies at their last summit have told me and us and the nations, you're going to study what this might have as consequences for Europe, and how the NATO territory, but then all of NATO territory, and not just part of NATO territory, could be covered against possible options rogue states might have when they get the bomb, and when, as important and as dangerous, they get the missiles who can transport these weapons over ever longer distances. So yes, within the framework of NATO, this discussion of missile defense is going on. And at the 60th anniversary of NATO's summit next year in Strasbourg and Kiel, interesting to notice, looking at Hans-Gert Pöttering and others, that NATO will celebrate its 60th anniversary in the heart of Europe, in France and in Germany. I underline this also, underlining the relationship between NATO and the European Union. But there certainly, and that's why I mentioned the summit, discussion on this issue will go on. Not an easy one, but a necessary one.